Today we'll be interviewing Zahra Albarazi, senior researcher and co-founder of the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion. Her work has mostly focused on the understanding of statelessness and nationality in the Middle East and Africa region. She has also conducted substantive research on the interlink between discrimination and statelessness. Thank you so much for joining us today, Zahra.
Thank you for having me on.
Can you begin by defining statelessness for us and telling us how someone could end up in that condition?
Yes, absolutely. There's often a lot of confusion about what the word actually means. The knowledge out there of this topic is quite minimal, but statelessness is actually quite a simple concept. It means someone who isn't a national of any country. He doesn't have a nationality. The actual legal definition, the definition that you find in international law, is someone who's not considered as a national by any state under the operation of its law. So it means that he doesn't have a nationality of any state anywhere. It's not that he's in a country outside of his nationality or he or she wants to obtain another nationality. It means it's just without a nationality. And that's why we call them stateless. There is no actual state that would give him nationality. There are actually many reasons why someone could become stateless. Often the concept of the state itself is a new concept in many regions. So if you can imagine when you're creating a new state and you're creating new borders, you've got to sort of suddenly decide who are my citizens and who are not, right? And that can be quite a complicated process. You've got to sort of, is it people who used to live here? Is it people whose parents used to live here? I mean, it's a very difficult process. And how do I actually find everybody and count them and make them my citizens? So a lot of people are stateless because they were left out. When states first became a state, when they first had to suddenly decide who were their citizens or not, they perhaps didn't register, or they were in one way or another left out. So they just sort of were never a national of any country. You find that a lot, for example, in tribes that are nomadic, tribes who travel a lot, didn't really know that they had to sort of register as a national, or they were left out for one reason or another. Predominantly, the reasons behind statelessness is actually discrimination. People are discriminated against. States do not want a certain type of person to be a national of their country, and therefore won't let them obtain their nationality, or even in certain circumstances strips them of nationality. I can give you some examples of this. So, for example, we've got the issue of religious discrimination in some nationality laws. If you've heard of the minority group called the Rohingya, they're kind of refugees everywhere because they're so persecuted. They're actually a Muslim minority group, and the state of Myanmar actually just removed them from their citizenry. So they kind of took nationality off them, said they used to be Myanmarese citizens, and they just changed their nationality law, which meant that they were no longer overnight Myanmarese. They all became stateless overnight. And that was like direct persecution of this group based on discrimination. You've also got other forms of discrimination. You've got racial discrimination. You've got discrimination against certain minority groups. And you've also got what we call gender discrimination in nationality laws. There's still approximately 27 countries in the world where women can't actually give nationality to their children on the same basis as men. So as a man, as a national, you can give your nationality to your child, but as a woman, you're unable to. And this can create statelessness in many contexts. For example, when the man is unknown, the man himself is stateless, the father cannot, for some reason, transfer his nationality because, he's been living outside of his country for many years, he isn't registered, etc. There are so many situations where if a woman can't give nationality to her child, the child can't get any nationality. So these are some of the examples of why an individual can become stateless. Of course, you've also got countries who take nationality off individuals as well for one reason or another. That might leave them without any nationality and might leave them stateless.
Right. And what kind of impact does this have on people? Do stateless people have any rights?
So this kind of very much depends from country to country. In a lot of countries, we find, for example, that citizenship really is, like possessing a nationality, really is your key to obtaining all sorts of other national rights. It is really the state. Everybody has the right to have a whole host of different rights. But who is it that grants you those rights? It's often the state to which you're a national of. So everybody has the right to sort of free education somewhere. That should be his or her state. Everybody has the right to live somewhere, right? Everybody who has a nationality has the right to remain in a country, to live there. And a stateless person might not actually have this right. They might be sort of illegal, as you might think, everywhere. They may not have rights to access employment. They may not have rights to access healthcare. So, I mean, the situation in every country is different, but the violation of rights of a stateless person can be really, really vast. Mm-hmm. And we also see not just sort of the impacts in terms of like legal impacts or access to rights, but also like quite significant psychological impacts. If you can imagine that like no state ever accepts you as a national, or you feel like you belong to a country, but you're being rejected by them. You're not able to become a national of that country. That can have quite severe psychological impacts. Mm-hmm. Really a problem of identity, and also sometimes a huge problem of guilt. When, for example, you feel that maybe it's your fault that your child was born stateless because you didn't take a particular administrative step, you didn't register your child in the embassy, or you married someone who was stateless, or whatever reason, you might feel really guilty because your child will suffer for the rest of their life because they're stateless.
I want to talk about statelessness in the Middle East. Yeah. Is there anything unique about being stateless in the MENA region?
There are so different regions have different kind of causes of statelessness, and they also have different kind of consequences. What we find in the Middle East, of course, generalizing quite a bit, is that there are so many causes of statelessness and there are so many consequences of statelessness. So, for example, you get, some of the things I mentioned at the beginning, the formation of a state, discrimination against gender discrimination, religious discrimination, ethnic discrimination, administrative problems. All of these reasons you find in the Middle East exist, which are causing stateless people. Also the deprivation of nationality, so the state taking nationality off people, individuals or whole groups of people because of their ethnicity, because of their race, etc. And we find a lot of the countries have gender discrimination, so women can't pass their nationality onto their children. And a lot of the consequences as well can be quite horrific. There is no state in the Middle East, so in the Gulf region, in the Levant region, which even sort of recognizes statelessness as necessarily an actual status in which, the state has to determine that person is stateless. They have to maybe offer some particular rights to them. So they're kind of just left out. They're left out. They often can't travel because, and especially in a lot of these countries, they're quite high security. So there's a lot of checkpoints everywhere when you try and travel, and you can't travel as a stateless person through checkpoints because you can't often show any sort of identity of who you are, or where you come from, and then you'll be at risk of being sort of detained. So I mean, it's difficult to generalize. There are many different stateless people in the Middle East. A lot of them, like I said, especially in the Gulf, were kind of missed out of registration. You've got a lot of Kurds who had nationality taken off them. Women can't give their nationality, but all in all, they're left in quite an impoverished situation, often really with completely excluded from the state. And what you find also in the Middle East is often statelessness comes alongside something else. So people aren't just stateless, but they're stateless because they're also a refugee, or because their family generations ago happened to be refugees, or they were internally displaced, or their ethnic minority was discriminated against. So statelessness often comes alongside other huge issues, which makes kind of the situation of an individual or a family that's already vulnerable even more vulnerable. So it adds like a layer of vulnerability onto these people, the concept of also being stateless as well as dealing with the other issues that they may have to be dealing with.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit more about this relationship between refugee status and statelessness, because you're right about the fact that this concept and this problem is not well known. I've mentioned it to people when I knew that you were going to be on the show, and when I brought it up, people's minds would go immediately to, right, refugees. What's the difference between a refugee and a stateless person? And then obviously the two are very interconnected. So can you speak on the relationship between those two statuses?
Sure. No, and I absolutely agree with you. I mean, till this day, I've been working on the issue for quite a while, and I'll mention it to people who I know well, and they're like, oh yeah, that's refugees. There's often a confusion. Mm-hmm. I want to start off by saying it's completely two different issues.
Okay.
The majority of stateless people have never left their country that they belong to, even though they don't have the nationality of. They've lived there for generations. Their parents were born there, their grandparents were born there. They've never had to leave their country. They're what we call in situ. They're very much in the country they've always belonged to. They never were refugees, and never will be refugees. That's not to say that there isn't, of course, and a refugee is someone who's fled persecution. So it's two different things. A stateless person is someone who doesn't have a nationality, often who's lived forever in the country where they should have a nationality, and a refugee is someone who's fled persecution. But of course, that's not to say, like many different types of human rights abuses, one doesn't sort of interlink with the other often. If we go back to sort of the examples of the Middle East, I can give you an example of why this might be an issue.
I would love to hear an example. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got, for example, the Syria refugee crisis now. So a lot of Syrian refugees have fled. They've become refugees, Syrian nationals, and they're very much Syrian nationals. They're not stateless. They are nationals of Syria. However, being in a displacement context, having become refugees, may make them more vulnerable to becoming stateless in the future. Why is this the case? For example, often, people lose documents on the way, and I just want to highlight that losing your documents or not having documents, again, does not mean you're stateless. But what happens is they may lose their documents, which may prevent them from registering, accessing new documents. It may prevent them from registering births of children. Their children may become adults that are undocumented, who may marry and have children, and there's a whole cycle of problems that interlink with each other, which means that their children may become at risk of becoming stateless. They may in the future not be able to prove that they are Syrian, and the Syrian government or the Syrian state may say, well, these people have no proof, therefore they're not Syrian. They won't be on the records of the Syrian state or the registries of the Syrian state. There are also, for example, we have in Syria is one of those countries where they discriminate against women, so women can't give their nationality to their children. So this is obviously a problem generally, but when you've also got a displacement context, so you've also got a lot of women who are fleeing, a lot of families who are fleeing, the men often may have died in conflict, they may have disappeared. There'll be an increase of women having children where the man is unknown, or they haven't been able to register the marriage, and the man has since disappeared, etc. So many, you can imagine all the different circumstances that increases when you have refugees and when you have a displacement context. May mean that more and more children who are born to women, who are Syrian women, but who can't prove that they have a Syrian father or a father of another nationality, may again become stateless. So it's not that gender discrimination wasn't a problem anyway, it was, but being in a displacement context heightens these problems. Mm-hmm. You've also got sort of the opposite situation. So here I spoke a little bit about how becoming a refugee may make you more likely to become stateless in the future. But there's also the opposite, where being stateless And like I said earlier, often statelessness comes along with something else, massive persecution of a certain group will actually be one of the reasons why you flee and become a refugee. So, for example, if we, in Iraq, if we remain in the Middle East, under the reign of Saddam Hussein, a lot of Kurds were denationalized. He sort of took the nationality off a lot of Kurds and stripped them of nationality. And of course, there were other issues that they were having to deal with, other types of persecution. A lot of them fled. So you have stateless people who have to deal with the problems of statelessness as well as other persecution who then flee. And then you've got a lot of refugees who, because of the vulnerability of their situation, may be at risk of becoming stateless. So the two definitely are interlinked, but the two are also very much two separate issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And do Palestinians fall under the definition of stateless people?
This is a very interesting question, and often when you ask this question, it does create a lot of sort of tension and conflict in the answer to this question. If we go back to what we said before, what a definition of a stateless person is, it's someone who's not seen as a national by any state. So there are lots of questions that you will have to ask, therefore. It depends, of course, if you consider Palestine as a state or not. So a lot of countries, for example, in the Middle East would consider Palestine as a state. So they may believe that people living in, the Palestinian territories are actually Palestinian nationals and not stateless. And then you have to think about what a national means. I mean, are people who live in areas outside of the Palestinian territories and who've been refugees for decades and generations, who will never return to the Palestinian territories, perhaps. Would they ever be considered a national, even if Palestine, you consider Palestine a state? So there are lots of sort of more complicated, complex questions to ask when you are asking whether Palestinians are stateless or not. A lot of international lawyers would say yes, they are stateless. The majority of Palestinian refugees. And of course, here we're talking about those who haven't got another nationality. And many Palestinians have gone to other countries and have become Swedish or American. I'm talking about ones who haven't obtained any other nationality. And most of them who are living in the neighboring countries of Palestine. Probably yes, but of course, I mean, it's more complicated than that. And I would say yes, a lot of them are stateless. They don't have a state that would call them a national. And the majority of states surrounding Palestine have an agreement, something called the Casablanca Protocol, where they wouldn't give their nationality to the Palestinians. This was done a long time ago in the belief that they wanted sort of to protect their right to return. So if they wanted to return in the future, they didn't want them all to naturalize as Syrians and Lebanese and Jordanians. So they haven't obtained nationalities, the majority of them, of the countries they've ended up in. And I would say that they're not currently a national of any state, most of the majority of them. So I would consider them as Palestinian, as stateless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You are listening to Let's Talk About the Middle East. We are talking to Zahra Albarazi, Senior Researcher at the Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion. Programming today is underwritten by the Center for Religious Tolerance located in Sarasota County. The CRT supports local and global peacemakers in order to bring people together across divides of religion, culture, and nationality. Their aim is to build a peaceful future by honoring and respecting our shared humanity. Find out about the initiatives they have supported in Israel and Palestine, Kenya, Honduras, and the United States by visiting c-r-t.org. The Center for Religious Tolerance, Religion as a Force for Peace. So Zahra, most of your research has been focused on discrimination and statelessness. Could you tell us a little more about your research?
Yeah, so I mean, if we're looking at sort of discrimination in the Middle East, discrimination and statelessness, So like I said, we've got different types. I focused a lot on the issue of gender discrimination in nationality laws. And, like you said before, the concept of statelessness isn't very well known, let alone the link between gender discrimination and statelessness. So often the research has been trying to show that there is a link. It's going out and finding families and talking with them and showing how the fact that a woman can't give nationality to her children means that her children are very high risk of becoming stateless. And often this is the case, and this affects tens of thousands of families worldwide. And it was also looking a lot at the impacts of statelessness. A woman who is a national who she herself has nationality, but she has stateless children, how that can perhaps impact a family. I mean, I might give you a few examples. So in a couple of countries, for example, we met families where, the woman is a national, and so if the children want to do anything, if the husband, who might be stateless, wants to do anything, like buy property, buy a car, buy a taxi so they can work off it, everything has to go into the mother's name, which, of course may not be a problem, but will be a problem in the future for inheritance reasons. These children can never inherit, because they are stateless, which means that, they can't own things, they can't inherit, but the mother owns everything, so it will all go to the mother's side of the family. And this often, stepping away from the obvious problems of statelessness, access to rights, access to education, this creates tensions in families. When you've got stateless children who see that what may be rightfully theirs isn't legally theirs, and it creates tension in families. There are also other examples of tension that statelessness causes. I know in a couple of countries in the Middle East, a woman can give nationality to her child if she divorces. So you have, I've met families where the children, in front of me were putting pressure on the parents. They couldn't get the nationality of their father because their father, for example, was stateless himself or for other reasons. And they would say, please, if you guys divorce, this would resolve our problems. We would be able to get nationality, and that means we would be able to marry in the future. We'd be able to work. We'd be able to live our lives. And there was a lot of, pressure on parents to divorce, so that their children could get nationality from their mothers. So a lot of the research I've done is first of all, showing that there is a link between this discrimination and children becoming stateless, and families becoming stateless, and often communities becoming stateless, and that the impacts are very severe in terms of, your general impact to rights, the impoverishment this causes you, the vulnerability this puts you in, and then the psychological effects and the tensions this causes in families. So a lot of the impacts are kind of revolved around that. Also, we've tried to look at kind of historically some of the other issues of discrimination. We've got a lot of sort of religious discrimination in the region, historical and current. So, often in some countries, people of certain religions can't necessarily naturalize. We've also got in some countries where there's a very, very, very delicate balance of confession, sort of what we call a confessional balance. So they're very afraid that one sect, one religion will have more nationals than the other, which sort of changes the balance or the power in a country. And so citizenship, giving people nationality or taking nationality off people is often a way to keep power on, which sects, which religion, which communities can be your national and can't. So that was, that's some other research that we've been doing. Of course, again, we've been doing research very recently. I've just come back from Lebanon, working, interviewing some of the, Syrian refugees there on how, discrimination again, in gender laws is sometimes affecting, is perhaps, allowing more cases of statelessness amongst Syrian refugees, because you speak to women who haven't registered their marriage and their husband's disappeared, or like I said before, has died, etc. So these are just sort of some of the examples of the of the discrimination that we're finding in some of the research that we're doing. And we're also, looking at, on the flip side of the coin, we're looking at sort of good case examples. There are cases where things are being solved. There are a lot of countries in Northern Africa where we now have gender neutral laws, and we see, because there's a lot of, there's growing awareness of the problems. There's growing awareness of how this affects, people's lives and families' lives. So yeah, we're also looking at good case examples, trying to highlight that, these cases can be solved. It's not, like, let's try and solve, poverty, or let's try and solve it's a really solvable issue, because it's very much a man-made issue. It's a law. And so it's always, just a tiny change of the law can affect hundreds of people's lives, thousands of people's lives, millions of people's lives. So also trying to show how at times, easily, if when we remove ourselves from the politics, this can be solved. And trying to encourage and advocate for steps to be made to resolve some of these issues.
Yeah. Well, so many issues that we're facing, they have solutions, like I'm thinking about climate change, for example. There, are obvious things that we should be doing, but of course there are obstacles and challenges to actually utilizing the solutions we have at hand. Would you say that there have been challenges in trying to convince institutions to take certain steps, or what types of things have you seen in trying to reach a solution to these issues?
Of course. I mean, there have been many challenges. One of the main challenges we already face is the fact that there is little awareness of this issue, whether that's amongst, people themselves, individuals, the public, whether it's amongst states. Often states will say, well, we don't have any stateless people here, which is, they just are unaware of this problem. Stateless people can often be invisible, right? Because they're not registered anywhere. They kind of are in the margins of society. They have to sort of hide, so they're not visible. So one challenge we have is the lack of awareness, and that's something we're gradually getting over. When I started work in this field 5-6 years ago, there really was very few people working on this, very little information, very little knowledge. Even in this 5-year gap, I've seen, much more momentum, much more interest, much more understanding that this is a significant problem. Of course, we've got political challenges. That's always an issue in whatever you're trying to deal with. Like I said, often the concept of citizenship is political. We've got now some countries in the Middle East who are, if they, after what the so-called Arab Spring, if there are certain groups or individuals particularly that they feel are opposition, they will take the nationality off them, because once you no longer have nationality of that country, it's much more difficult to say that you represent that country and that you can be in opposition. So political will is often a problem. Of course, often these people are stateless because they've been discriminated against by the ruling power. So trying to get that reverse, to try and include these people, can often be difficult. There's also public awareness, not just on the issue of statelessness, but because often some of the problems are quite administrative, knowing that you have to register in an embassy, or knowing that you have to, steps that you have to take to ensure that you can continue to prove your nationality for yourself and your family and your children. States need to make more of an effort to ensure that there is more public awareness on this. So that could be quite a challenge as well.
And we have maybe 20 seconds, but I just want to ask, what advice would you give to people who want to get involved in this issue?
I would say look at what kind of organizations are working on this issue. I think it's always good. I mean, if there are a particular group of stateless people, to really understand that group, to really kind of do research on this particular group. We really would encourage people from all sorts of different disciplines to get involved and look at these groups and look at the issues from different disciplines. At the moment, we're mainly lawyers working on this, but we need psychologists. We need people who work in the health sector. We need a whole variety of people and politicians to be able to understand groups that are stateless more holistically and therefore come together to try and find solutions. So yeah, really understand the groups that you're working with, why they're stateless, how they're stateless, and look at examples of how this is being resolved in other parts of the world that may be able to be sort of translated.
We've been talking to Zahra Albarazi, co-founder and senior researcher at the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion. You can go on their website at www.institutesi.org. I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us and inform us about this.
Thank you for having me on, and so many issues trying to talk about in very little time. So please get in touch with us if you'd like to know more.
If you want to learn more about this show, give us feedback, or share ideas for topics or speakers, you can find us on Facebook or YouTube. Just search Let's Talk About the Middle East. Our theme music is from Merkava by Israeli musician and peace activist Gabby Myers. Join us next time for an interview with Ben Ehrenreich, who will be talking about his new book, The Way to the Spring, Life and Death in Palestine. Take care and spread the peace.